Okay. Cool. Hi, everyone. Nice to see that so many of you are coming into this webinar that we are going to host today. I'm here with my colleague Amy, and we will be taking care of everything behind the scenes today, while our colleague Joe is going to be talking with the remote coaches Jay and Kirsten about how to achieve flow in remote meetings. And I think this is a very hot topic at the moment, so we are really happy that you guys set aside some time for this webinar with us. Before we start, I just want to let you know that you can chat with us during the whole presentation. So please set the settings in your chat to panelists and attendees so that everyone sees all your great comments. For any questions you have throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A for this. We will have a look at the questions in the end of the session together with the presenters. It's also a recording as usual, and we will share this recording with you guys afterwards in an email and then also on social media and our website. So just stay tuned for that. That's it, I think, from me and Amy at the moment. We will be back after the presentation, and I'm going to hand it over now to Joe and the remote coaches.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophia. I think Jay's going to...
Yeah, no worries, Joe. Thank you, Sophia. So welcome. So today we're speaking about achieving flow in remote meetings. Our hope for today is that you leave feeling a little bit inspired, but also walk away with some practical tips that you can use when you leave. So for today, we'll cover some stats on remote work. We'll share some insights from neuroscience, and then we'll share ideas around flow and remote meetings. So while this isn't an interactive workshop, in some instances we'd love to hear from you, and as Sophia said, we'll ask you to engage in the chat or in the slides if we share it at certain places. So we might ask you a question or two. But first, we would like to introduce ourselves to you. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jay. I work full-time as a remote agile coach at IO, and I'm also part of the remote coaches with Kirsten. Kirsten and I kind of have the same description at the moment. We both work at IO as full-time agile coaches. We both wrote the Remote Facilitators Pocket Guide, and we are joined by the lovely Joe Perold, who is from Agile 42. And Joe is a coach, facilitator, and trainer, an amazing keynote speaker. So yeah, so we've built this talk together. So hopefully you'll enjoy. So we wanted to speak about a little bit of remote working stats before we get into the details of the flow in remote meetings. We wanted to set the scene for remote work here. And we didn't want to be completely anecdotal. We wanted to share some real information around what's happening. And also we just want to say that these stats are kind of specific to first world economies and to kind of digital and knowledge work, but this is what we could find at the moment. So as you know, COVID has been a reality for us for the last few months. And so pre-COVID, before all of this went down, about 10 to 15% of people worked from home or worked remotely. And I specify the difference because people can work from anywhere. So that was about 10 to 15% pre-COVID. Just at the beginning of COVID, kind of like, no, sorry, let me go back. It's estimated that when we come out of COVID, that about 40 to 50% of people will be working remotely. Of course, we are yet to see how this will play out, but it's estimated that it will be quite a bit higher than the pre-COVID numbers. And then when looking at the research, the top 3 challenges that frequently come up for people when working remote are collaboration, social connection, and separating work and life. So with collaboration, there's the sentiment that collaborating with colleagues is a lot more challenging when working remote. And this is due to a lack of collaborative workspaces, and also the lack of ease to face-to-face communication. So collaboration is one of those challenges that comes up a lot. The second is social connection. So what's emerging is there are a lot of feelings of isolation and loneliness when working remote. So some people find the transition to remote working quite challenging because of these lonely feelings. Feeling like it's a lot harder to connect with others when you're working by yourself and not in an office. And some of the things that people miss is like overhearing those conversations that happen in the desk next door. It's that low buzz or humming that you hear when people are speaking in the office that makes you feel less alone. And it's just that stumbling into the kitchen when you're going to make coffee or tea and just having this conversation with someone. Some of those things are a lot harder to find in remote work than it is in co-located spaces. And then the third one is just separating work and life and those particular boundaries. So now, especially with COVID, not everybody has the privilege to separate their workspace from their home space at home. Like that is something that only some people are able to do. And they might not be set up for remote work in their homes if that's where they're working from. And so they can be challenged by constant interruptions or finding those boundaries or even closing off for the day. Just setting that specific space boundary and also that mental boundary to leave work and go home. So that is some of the top 3 challenges that we've been finding. And we're sharing these insights with you because we believe that remote work is here to stay. And if that estimation of 40 to 50% is correct, it means that more and more companies will move to remote. And so in order to cope with this reality of that we can see going forward, we think it's important to focus on remote meetings because as we believe that the quality of meetings can impact organizational outcomes. And if we know how to improve meetings, it can have a real on remote work in general.
Thanks, Jay. Always remember to unmute. The mantra of 2020. Thanks very much. So in the pocket guide that Jay and Chris wrote, they outline a whole lot of principles, and we also have a remote facilitation course that outlines and goes into detail on a lot of these principles. But today we've decided that we're just going to zoom into one of the principles because it's not enough time to give you detail on all of them. So we're going to just zoom in on one so that you can get a feel for what are some things that you can try, what are some things that you can do, and what are some things that can help in remote spaces. But from a kind of high-level principle perspective, here are 7 principles that we like to think about. So the first one is to create equal opportunity, and what are all the different ways we could do that. The second one is to guide with visuals. The third one that we're going to take a deep dive into is enable flow. The fourth is to nurture connection and safety. The fifth one is to provide variety. Playful learning is number 6, and then tool mastery is number 7. And all of those are kind of equally important, we think. And for each one, there's some practical methods and practical tips that we go into in the details of both the course and the book. But for today, we're going to show you some practical methods for how can you enable flow in your meetings and what makes them feel stuck. So for those of you that are following along in the slide deck, we posted a link to the slide deck, and we're going to post another link to the slide deck now. I'm just going to copy and paste it quickly. If you're in the deck, go to slide number 5 and type in one of those speech bubbles or thought bubbles. What do you find breaks the flow in remote meetings? And if there's a little bit of chaos here, it doesn't matter. That's one of the things, right? Like when we create some visual way to work, then it's okay for it to get a little bit chaotic, right? It's a space to think. So what have we got? We've got technical challenges, participants interrupting each other, people sharing information outside the meeting scope. Yes, when they talk about something that's not part of the topic, right? And not part of what we're here to discuss. Distracted and not listening. Lag, yes. Other people working in your space and interrupting. People stealing your thought bubbles and writing in the same thought bubble as you, maybe sometimes. Sometimes they don't have their camera on, so it's not easy to concentrate. All the distractions like emails and all those other kinds of things maybe that can help get stuck. Sound delays, distracted people, people don't know how to interrupt, you're on mute, technical challenges, a lot of silence, interrupting each other, that whole like, let's all start talking at once and then nobody says anything and then everybody starts at once again, and then nobody knows what to do, yeah, which is less likely to happen in a physical space. Oh, these are awesome. Alrighty. Great, so let's, I see the typing is starting to slow down, so let everybody finish their thought, and then we're going to move on to slide number 6. So for each of our principles, we have a metaphor that we like to think about. So a lot of these principles, they're associated with a metaphor, and we've got a lot of traffic metaphors or transportation metaphors, because facilitation is a little bit like taking a group on a journey, right? So your job as a facilitator often is to help the people that you're working with to get somewhere awesome. Sometimes we know very clearly what that outcome is up front. Sometimes that outcome can emerge if we're doing some facilitating for more complex issues. So it depends on what's going on. But our goal as a facilitator is to take those people on a journey. And there's often lots of different ways for us to get to the outcomes. And lots of different things, but that's why we've got a whole lot of kind of traffic or journey metaphors as part of how we like to think about these things. So when we think about flow, we think about traffic. So Cape Town and Joburg, and I'm sure you can think of a place in the world somewhere where either you may have visited or maybe it's where you live, where traffic gets really, really bad. It gets really bad, right? And you're sitting and it's so frustrating because you can almost see the destination. Sometimes I look and I can see where it's like a kilometer and there's a dude walking past me and he's going to get there before me, and I'm like, no, this is so annoying, you know. And sometimes I just want to get out of my car and like just leave it there on the side of the road and just carry on walking, you know. And so when there's lots of traffic, then there's obviously no flow, and that lack of flow can cause a lot of frustration in your brain. Like if I think about what happens to me, I get like these tense shoulders and all of this stuff starts happening for me. And the thing is that sometimes from a cognitive perspective, and we'll talk a little bit about Chris going to go through that with us in a second, that's also happening to us. And so that lack of flow is impacting our ability to contribute. So the first, so principle number 3 is enabling flow. And Kirst.
Thanks, Jo. I could feel the traffic feeling as you were speaking. And it's so interesting because I think what you described, someone going faster when they're walking, is sometimes how you feel in remote meetings. Like, I feel like I could get there faster if I just did this by myself than having to sit here on this remote call and collaborate. And so to understand this a little bit more, we're going to spend a bit of time still in the problem space and understanding this experience of stuckness. And then we'll get to some ideas about what you can do about it. So as we go a little bit deeper into thinking about stuckness, we're actually going to think about the opposite feeling, which is that feeling you get when you solve a crossword puzzle. So just for a moment, think what it feels like when you're sitting there trying to get that word and suddenly you get that word. That kind of, sometimes it's described as an aha moment, or insights, or flow is a common term. It feels really good. And it's definitely the opposite of feeling stuck in traffic. And to go a little bit deeper into what is actually happening in the brain for people when they're in these kinds of states of flow or achieving insights, we're going to reference this study, which was called the neural correlates of the aha moment. And basically what they did, a bunch of researchers hooked up a bunch of subjects to these machines, and they looked at what was going on in people's brains at the moment of having insight or an aha. And the way they did this was they presented people with 3 words. So there are 3 words on the screen. And they looked at what happened when they found the 4th word which connected those 3 words. So I'm going to pause here and see if anyone can find the word that connects those 3 words. Don't feel bad if you can't. I couldn't. Anyone want to pop it in the chat what they think connects those 3 words? Cara was quick. Yes. Now I feel bad. But yes, it was tree. And they did this with lots and lots of words. And they started to see what was emerging when people were getting to these moments of insight, which, just to anchor it back to meetings, is the states we want people to be in meetings, right? We don't want people to be feeling frustrated and stuck. We want them to be able to achieve these insights. And what was interesting is they found that closing loops activates reward circuitry in the brain. So when you have this question that's open in your mind, or let's say we're sitting together in a meeting to solve X, it kind of opens a loop in your brain. And when you're able to close that loop, it's rewarding. The same circuitry as if you're eating something good or you're positively reinforced by somebody happens when you achieve insight. It's like a little dopamine kick. And not only do people feel more engaged and positive in that state, but they're also able to think more creatively. Because now they're in this positive state cognitively, they're able to do more creative thinking. And then it's kind of a self-reinforcing loop, because now they're feeling more positive, they're more likely to achieve more insights, and it goes on and on. And so we will map this back to meetings in a moment, in case it's feeling like we're going out on a limb a little bit. But as we do start kind of bringing it back to meetings, we can think back to what we were discussing earlier, which was the opposite of flow and insights, which is feeling stuck. And those remote meetings that just feel so slow or sluggish, and we're here to answer this thing, or we're here, as Joe said, to get to a destination. And for whatever reason, we're not able to get there. We're not able to solve the puzzle. We're not able to connect the 3 words. Our brain isn't getting that dopamine kick and activating reward circuitry. And so what happens in those kinds of scenarios? There's 3 possible consequences. When we're stuck or not able to close the feedback loops, sometimes people can become disengaged. So you've been trying to solve the puzzle, you've been trying, and now you can't. So that's the kind of meeting where you feel tempted to open Twitter, maybe. And you're kind of just like, this effort, it's not really worth it anymore. Your brain's checking out, it's tired now. And that's obviously not what we want in remote meetings, but also, to be fair, it's what we often see a lot of. The second thing that can happen when we inhibit people from feeling like they can flow through a space is that they've become tired. So it's almost like you have these background tasks running in the back of your brain, taking up CPU. And the more that you load on these tasks, so we're trying to solve this problem and we can't solve it in a meeting because it's going so slow. And then the conversation goes somewhere else, and now it's feeling more like now I'm holding 2 things in my brain. And then someone drops off, and then we lose the flow. And it begins to compound, and then you can just become really fatigued, because now you're kind of just holding all of this and you're not getting any of the closure from closing these loops. So that's the second possible impact. And the third one, which is probably the more primal one, is you just become frustrated. It just gets irritating. And this is something I can relate to, where sometimes I get frustrated in a meeting and it's no one's point, but I just begin to incorrectly associate my frustration. I begin to, get agitated or frustrated, and it's purely because my brain is trying to close a loop and it can't. And unfortunately, as we've discussed, remote meetings present lots of potential ways to stop us from closing these loops. But the good news is that we are going to start just now sharing some ways that you can get around this to help people flow and avoid feeling stuck. But before we do, that was quite a lot of information and we wanted to pause here. So we're going to pause for a minute just to allow you some time to assimilate what is standing out for you now. And we'll just hang out here for a minute in silence. You're welcome to share in the chat if you'd like to, but no pressure, just a minute for you to integrate some of that stuff. Okay, it was probably just under a minute, but I think we can move on. So over to you, Jay. Okay, so before we quickly give you some of our ideas of what you can do, we just want to share 4 categories of challenges and how we think about it, and we call it 4 categories of stuckness. So the first one that we see is technical challenges, and I guess we're all kind of familiar with like, oh, my internet signal is not strong enough for me to have video, or I'm hearing a robot voice and it's just causing the meeting to get stuck because we can't move forward. The second one is comprehension challenges. So this could be people whose home language is different from the meeting spoken language. It could be there's just so much information going on, I can't actually understand what's happening. So comprehension can have another cause of stuckness, can be another cause of stuckness. And then the third one is ambiguity. So maybe some things are unclear and I have no way to clarify this in the space because everybody's just speaking and there's no information for me to grasp on. So ambiguity is the third one. And the last one is digital fatigue, which I think a lot of people are feeling at the moment. They sometimes go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and it just feels like a lot. And I think Kirsten mentioned it earlier, or Joe. It's that feeling of like, I'm just so tired, like I'd rather just check Twitter or something bland instead of being in this meeting right now, which can also cause some kind of stuckness. And so the next thing we just like to ask you, the next question, we'd like to, I guess, get some ideas from the wisdom of the group. And so we're going to pose this question, and feel free to post in the chat. If you want to get from A to B in a remote meeting, what are some of the things that could help us? What are some of the things that can help the group to get there? So if you think about from the start of the meeting to the end, what are some things that can help you mitigate some of those feelings of stuckness or some of those challenges? If you're in the slide deck and you want to write in a circle, feel free, or you can just pop in the chat. Yeah, so clearly communicated goal, purpose, outcome, working agreements. Yeah, different ways of interaction. Also seeing on the slides, is the tool working for everyone? That can definitely be a blocker to flow. I see asking back, clarifying that everybody what everyone has understood, and being clear on closing the loop. Yeah, using a poll. Nice. Okay. So there are a lot of good ideas, and some of those we'll actually share next. So now we'll look at some of our examples. So what can you do about these challenges? And some of our examples have already been answered, which is amazing. So first we'll look at technical challenges. Some of the ways that you can help this feeling of stuckness, not unstuckness, is agree on a back channel beforehand. So for example, Slack is a common one that people use to say, if you are unable to join the meeting, if you get knocked out, if for some reason you have technical challenges, this is the channel or the space of communication you can use in order to let us know or to keep up to date or so forth. I just use Slack, but it can be whatever internal tool you use in your workspace. The second one is co-create visual documentation. And this is really about, as an example, we're now using Google Slides. And in some of the slides, we've asked you to add your thoughts. You've taken your own notes. Nobody scribed that for you. And so if, for example, you happen to leave the webinar and you came back, you could see a record of some of the conversation that we've had. And so even though you left the call and you came back, you'd still be able to sort of catch up on what happened in the conversation. So that's kind of what we mean by co-create visual documentation. And troubleshooting. It's such a simple and small one, but sometimes it's really helpful to just say, like, if you don't need video on, we'd rather favor voice and allow you to interact with the document rather than forcing everybody to have the camera on, which might cause a problem in terms of a video connection. And of course, there are other ways to troubleshoot, but make some space for that at the beginning of the call. So next, we will just show you one example of what it might look like for co-creating visual documentation. So as we mentioned, we kind of did this as a demonstration, but on slide 16, so we had these blank sticky notes, and that we'd have at the start of the meeting, and then throughout, people will kind of take their own notes, which is on slide 17, which is now showing on the screen. So allowing everybody to engage with the document or the slide deck or the Moodle or whatever tool you're using by themselves. And in that sense, you co-create a visual representation of the discussion.
And if I could pop in, there was a comment in the chat about like tool fluency and being able to use Google Slides, etc. And I think that's a really important point, because another thing that can create stuckness is assuming everyone has the same fluency with the tool you're using. And so spending a few minutes up front teaching the basics rather than making the assumption. And we tend to prefer the simpler tools, because the more complex, the higher the onboarding cost at the beginning. So yeah. Okay, Joe.
Thanks. Okay, so the next stuck topic we're going to tackle is comprehension challenges. So what are some of the ways that we can think about and that we can tackle comprehension challenges? So one of the things that we can do is we can allow people quiet time to think. I don't know if it happens for anyone else, but for me, there's people who think first and then speak, and there's people who speak to think. And for me, I actually am a little bit of both. Sometimes I need to speak to think about something, and sometimes I need to think about something first, process what other people have said. And so it depends on the context. And so finding space and creating space for people to think before they're engaging in something. So it's not constant talk, because remote meetings especially favor verbal communication, right? And so how do we create more spaces of silence and more spaces for people to think a little bit? with something, right? Not just like without anything. Then providing participation via writing. So for lots of people, their spoken English is not great, but their written English is better. For example, if it's in English, maybe it's Portuguese, maybe it's Russian, maybe it's some other, whatever the whatever it is that the language that the meeting is taking place in. But sometimes also helping, creating a space for people to write things down for themselves can also help them think things through and process information as well. So for comprehension, participation via writing. Then make meeting artifacts visual. So you'll see a lot of these examples in our slide deck is around creating ways where the artifacts for the meeting are very, very visual and allow people to easily see where we are and what's happening. And then creating the pausing and checking for understanding. And pausing and checking for understanding works better if you've got visual artifacts and visual documentation around, so that you can check that everybody knows what's going on and that the meaning that has been made is shared for everybody in the space. So there's that. So what are some kind of practical tips? So here's an example of creating space for people to think about things and to read, right? So if we're thinking about a topic, maybe something around what are the challenges, then creating space for people to read through resources. A lot of the time, people don't have time to do pre-reading when they come to meetings. So creating a short amount of space for people to assimilate some of the resources and some of the things that we want people to think about, and then allowing them to use that information to populate an agenda, to start creating what the topics and to start prioritizing the topics around what do we need to talk about here today and what are the big important things that we need to think about. So that's just one example of using those. Next, we're going to talk about ambiguity. So ambiguity, I find this happens to me quite a lot. If there's just a lot of talking in a meeting, I can get very, very lost quite easily. And it used to happen to me when we were face to face anyway. So before it was remote, it would happen to me. And when I would get lost, there were two things that I would do. The first thing that I would want to do is grab a pen and start writing things on a whiteboard. And the second thing is that I would want to know, like, how are we supposed to be in this space? So getting the clarification. So having agenda and session rules visible and available to everybody and setting those up front can create a really safe container for people as well, and can make sure that we alleviate some of that ambiguity that might play out in a space. Then if we're using a tool like Miro or Google Slides or whatever the case may be, having visual instructions, some way for people to know, what am I supposed to be doing here? How am I supposed to interact in this specific space or with this specific artifact or whatever it is that we're doing? Then again, this visually validating the outcome. So if we've decided on something or if we've gotten to an outcome, make sure that that outcome is visual and available so that everybody can see what we're doing. So I'm the kind of person that needs to not just see, but also be able to touch stuff. So I almost need it. I need to be able to put my mouse on it or have some way that I can touch it. As you can see, I'm using my hands, and I'm going to probably go to that physical slide in the slide deck and hover my mouse in that space because I want to be able to touch things because that connects me to that. And then finally to root participants in the present. And that's fairly easy. We're on slide number 20 at the moment, or in Miro or some of those other tools, you can either navigate or bring people to you or have a way that helps people to understand where are we, both in the virtual space that we might be using to interact, but also like where are we in our agenda, where are we in our meeting, what is going to be happening next. So rooting participants in the present. So here on slide 21, we just have an example of having an agenda and session rules available. So at the bottom, we've got some working agreements. Maybe our working agreements are having mutes for background noise, raising hands. If we want to chat, that's how we kind of figure out whose talk order maybe. maybe there's something along the lines of co-creating documentation, or maybe they mean something else to the participants. The important thing is that they're there and that there's a shared understanding for the people, that everybody knows what those things mean. And that they're visible, right, to everybody. And then if the agenda is visible, then we all know, well, what's going to happen and how long are we going to spend on things. It gives that certainty for people, and that also enables, like, oh, cool, we're talking about this now.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. Cool. And so what I'm going to talk about now is the last category of stuckness then, which we called digital fatigue. And I think this is probably one of the most relatable ones. And when we think about it, one of the things that comes to mind is just the sensory overloady nature of a remote call compared to an in-person meeting. Because if you think about an in-person meeting, it's much simpler to digest the information because we're kind of used to that as human beings, just being together in person. But on a call, you're kind of juggling tools, the collaboration tool, the video tool, maybe you're getting pop-ups going on, and we tend to find that remote calls fatigue people a lot quicker than an in-person meeting would. And so rather than pretending it doesn't or working around it, we try to work with it and see what you can build into your meeting to accommodate that and make sure that people's growing tiredness doesn't also then begin to slow the meeting down or rob you of quality outcomes. And so these are 3 tips that we have. The one is to make space for breaks. As a rule of thumb, I like to pause at least every 45 to 50 minutes for at least 10 to 15 minutes. And that may sound semi-expensive, but I think the cost is worth it, because then you get people back that are fresh and they've probably moved around a bit and there's fresh blood circulation, which has very literal benefits. So yeah, just taking more breaks in a remote meeting can help. And the next thing is building in energy cues. And we'll give you an example of how this might be done. But even now, you can only see this tiny little square. I can see kind of a bit of Joe and Jay, but I can't really gauge how tired Joe or Jay are. Joe or Jay sounds funny. And that's the thing with remote meetings, right? We have no visual data on how people are doing, or we have very little or poor data. And so giving people an alternative mechanism to more explicitly indicate that they need a break, it empowers them, but it also empowers you as a facilitator to be able to make decisions that are right for the group. And so build in some way for people to let you know they're tired, whether it's via the chat or a slide or something, just some way for you to gauge energy. And then the last one, which is a huge topic in and of itself, but consider what can be done asynchronously. And so for those who aren't familiar with the term, asynchronously just means that it's not a real-time back and forth transmission of information. So a meeting is synchronous because it's back and forth, but there are actually many discussions that can happen asynchronously. And things like gathering data or maybe brainstorming options or just getting some of that stuff down initially can be done often asynchronously. And if you can take some of the work out of a meeting to documentation before the time, then you can bring that into the meeting and you kind of start 2 steps ahead. And so those are 3 possible suggestions. And just to show you what we meant by energy cues, in this example on the right side, this will be at the top of you could use it on a mirror board or here if it was Google Slides. The invitation is that when people are feeling tired, they drag a little clock into that block. And I can stop sharing. There we go. One appeared. So someone's everyone's tired. Everyone's really tired. We need to take a break. But that then begins to give you data, and it's anonymous. People don't have to explicitly be the person saying, I'm tired. And it's a nice, lightweight way for you to manage the traffic in your meeting and help enable flow. So those are our suggestions for the categories of feeling stuck. And again, what we're going to do is pause here because there's been quite a lot of information transmitted. So we're going to pause for another minute to ask you what is on your mind now. And we'd love to hear it via the chat. But also, if you would just like to use it for personal reflection, then yeah, we've got a minute here. Async stands for asynchronous. Sorry for the lazy word. Shout out to Joe in the chat. Cool. And so where we're going to go from here is just a quick summary, and then we've got time for questions. So if you do have questions that are coming, thanks for the clarification, Steve. So if you do have questions that are coming up in the bottom menu of Zoom, you should see the two little speech bubbles that look like that have Q&A under. You can start popping your questions in there. But yes, just to recap and kind of tie it all together, our intention today was to help give you some ideas for how you can achieve flow in remote meetings. And we started by painting the picture of remote working in the world and where we think it's going and how it's kind of here to stay, but also there are some significant challenges which are consistently being reported on. And then we zoomed in on the principle of flow. And we spoke about why traffic is really frustrating, and watching that little guy walking next to your car going faster than you, or maybe feeling like it's easier to do things alone than collaborate remotely. And that's a very valid feeling sometimes. And then we spoke about what's happening in the brain when we are inhibited from achieving insights versus when we are actually able to achieve insights or flow through a space, and how good it feels, as well as the positive impacts that gives your meeting and the conversations happening. And then we shared some ideas of what you can do about it. We spoke about digital fatigue, how you can help overcome that or work with it. We spoke about the technical challenges and what we can do to kind of mitigate them, as well as possible comprehension challenges, and some tips and tricks. And the fourth one was ambiguity. When it feels like the remote space is just a little bit fuzzy, what you can do to defuzz the ambiguity. And so all that's left for us now is to say thank you very much for joining us. We hope you took something valuable from this. I think the ladies are going to reiterate this now, but we do have a course coming up if you're interested, and you can also check out our book. And now we have the rest of time for questions. Thank you.
Super. Thank you guys for the presentation. It was really interesting. We also want to share some details regarding the training that you mentioned. The training is taking place in the afternoons, which is very good because a lot of people can join from different time zones. And it's also a 3-day training, which is non-consecutive, so it's not a lot of time in once taken from you guys. And since it's Friday, and since we are very happy today that so many of you joined, we also have a special discount code that we're going to offer every one of you who signed up today to the webinar. So stay tuned for the email. We're going to share the details for this with you later today. And with this discount code, you can then attend the training. So we hope to see a lot of you there, so you have a lot of more information than what we had time to share with you now in this webinar. But I think it was really, really interesting. What about you, Amy?
Yeah, no, it was great. Thank you, guys. And yeah, just to let you know that we are recording this, and we will be sharing that with you all in the email and on our social media channels. So that'll be going out soon. So if you've missed anything, and you can share to your network, that'd be great. Thanks. Cool. Okay, so yeah, just any questions? Maybe give people another minute, see if there's any questions. Okay.
Yeah, people have been quite active during the whole webinar in the chat, which is really nice. So there might be questions already answered, but there might be also something that comes up.
Well, there was one, I think, maybe it was just his thoughts, but he was wondering how can we keep these things visual when switching screens a lot? So I thought that was quite a good question.
Maybe we could clarify the question a bit. Is it, I don't know, Joe or Jay, if you have ideas. It sounds to me like the question is around screen sharing, or is it about juggling your video and then the virtual collaboration tool?
Yes, I think it's maybe if in the meeting there's a lot of screens, people got to flick through documents, and there's also Zoom, and say you've got one screen. So I can yeah, I can relate to that. Cool.
Yeah. Any ideas, ladies?
The only thing I can say is that it is a bit of a challenge, but especially if you're just using your laptop and you don't have a second screen. But one thing we try to do when we're facilitating is not to share our screen if we're collaborating together. Not only because then people have to focus on our screen and the other screen, but we've also had it where some people try and edit the Zoom sort of like screen instead of the document itself. I don't know if that helps. It is challenging if you only have one laptop screen for sure.
I just wanted to add to that. I think if you're going to be working remotely for a prolonged period of time, investing in a second screen is one of the best decisions you can make. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, we've got lots of questions coming through now.
We've got lots. Okay, so let's go. We've got one here. Do all remote meetings need a facilitator?
I can take a stab at that, if that's cool. So I think it's a bit like in-person meetings. Not necessarily all remote meetings need a facilitator. If there's 2 or 3 people getting together to do something, they know each other well, they work together frequently, and they know, and it's kind of straightforward and easy, then I think not necessarily. But if you're doing kind of big problem solving and you need equal participation, and you're trying to encourage new groups to work together, or you're building a team, or for any of those kinds of reasons, then I would recommend having a facilitator around, because it can change everything. From the level of frustration, from the meeting outcomes, all of that kind of thing. But I'm always I like to think about context a lot. So I always try to think about what is the context around this thing. What problem are we trying to solve? How many people are trying to solve it? And a question that I love, Jay often asks, is how do I need these people to interact? And so understanding that would also help answer the question, do we need a facilitator or not?
I could add on there, because I see a connection between the 2 questions, do we need a facilitator and how do we convince people to use these tricks I saw. And I think the connection for me there is you don't need a facilitator, but it always helps to have facilitation wisdom in the room. And I think it's for me, because I don't see these things as tricks. I see them kind of as fundamental, like human processes or system processes or team processes, that if we lean on them, just improve the quality of our collective thinking and outcomes. And so for me, to the first question, you don't need a facilitator, but it'll probably help if someone in the room has some kind of facilitation thinking in their mind. And answer that second one of an easy way to explain why we use tricks, I think, is they're less tricks and they're more frameworks for effectiveness and quality. It works with the brain, it works with human stuff. And I think it's useful to explain that to people, because one of my worst things is if at the start of the meeting we're told to do something and we don't know why. It's a perfectly justifiable reason to be frustrated if you don't know why.
I also want to add to the tricks question. So at the moment, I work with a lot of business people and I'm less on the tech side. And so whenever I'm doing something or facilitating a specific technique, I will, like Kirsten said, explain why we're doing something. I'll share some context about why I'm asking for this thing, and so that people understand like what I'm trying to get the group to get out of it. And I think also by doing that with some of my teams, what's happened is that people have learned that thing for themselves. So when they have meetings now, they incorporate some of these techniques into their meetings when I can't be there.
Cool. Okay, great. Thanks, ladies. Yeah, so I think this is a good one. One of the concepts of facilitation is that movement trumps sittings. Any ideas on how we can we integrate more movement remotely?
I can take a stab. I've come to see movement as looking a little bit different in a remote space, and I think of variance. And so obviously breaks is one way to literally bring in more movement, so people are encouraged to, but I'm not a huge fan of making people like stand up or do lots of wacky things on a call. Rather, I think about the movement within the collaboration tool. How can we vary that movement? So if your entire collaboration for, let's say it's a full day workshop, is write on stickies, breakout rooms, there's no variability in that movement. And so how can you vary it? Like maybe you can make sliders, indicate your preference by dragging the thing, or grouping, or I mean, there's lots of creative ones we can't go into, but trying to find virtual movement so that different parts of people's brains are being used and it still feels fun and creative. That's one way I think about it. Sure.
And another cool one that I also learned from Jay and Kirst is to do things like walkie-talkies when you're just having kind of a one-on-one thing. So if you're having a one-on-one call for whatever reason, then why don't you do it while you're walking around and talking, if that's something that you can do, like go for a walk in your garden or up your street or wherever makes sense and is safe, and all of those kinds of things, and chat to each other like that. So you're incorporating movement in those smaller areas as well. So I also like that kind of way to incorporate me. I just move because, you know.
Cool. Great. Yes, and I think this one's, so from Kristen. Have you blocked time for folks to do their async work? Has that worked? Or leave it to them to do that?
I think the purpose of working asynchronously is that people are allowed the flexibility to do it in their own time. So I'd be very hesitant to block out time for people. But what I do find useful is to give it a time box. So this is the point we want to reach via this document. And do we all feel we can achieve this by the end of the week, for example? And then even facilitating asynchronously, so asking questions on the document or nudging people. I saw this came up, did you see it? So I find a time box is more useful than managing people's time.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, Sophia, I don't think any more questions have we got outstanding.
No, I think you kind of covered them all.
I just saw one new one in the chat, ladies. Sorry, there's one from Jose. You want to?
Yeah. Do you have suggestions on what type of topics would be best be addressed async versus in the meeting?
I can only answer this question from my experience. It really depends. For me, it depends on the team and the topic can be approached completely different by a different team. And I'll give you a practical example. So with one team, we try to have an asynchronous discussion about our process and how we work, our ways of working. And that totally bombed and it didn't work. Whereas with another team, it worked quite well. So I don't think that it can be topic specific. Something that we are trying at the moment, which is going to be interesting, is figuring out a conflict situation via asynchronous discussion, which I think could be quite risky. And the way we're going to set up that conversation has to be really, really structured and important. So yeah, that's my experience. For me, it depends on the team.
Yeah, I would +1. And if you're looking for a light heuristic, I might say the simpler the topic, the better it is for asynchronous. Like if it's gathering data, for example, about a problem, that's useful, or evaluating specific options and just along certain criteria, that can. So if we were to rate things from simple to complex, the simpler regions tend to be easier asynchronously.
Yeah, and it sounds like if you're going to experiment, start simple first before you start.
Agree. Great. Thank you, ladies. Cool. So almost time.
I think that was all the questions, yeah, and we're running out of time as usual with questions in the webinars. So thanks everyone for sharing all your thoughts and your comments and asking questions. As Amy already mentioned, we're going to send you the email with the recordings and the slides from today and the discount code for the training, so stay tuned for that. If you have any other questions, you can always reach out to any one of us and we're happy to help you. Thanks also to Jay and Kirsten for your time today, and thanks also Joe for being here with us. Thanks Amy for co-hosting, it was awesome, and we hope to see you in the next upcoming webinars. Until that, stay safe and have a fantastic weekend.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Sophia. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amy. Bye. Thanks, everybody.